Get this started up. All right, peace and blessings, family. Welcome to another edition of African Spiritual Conversations. And of course, I am joined by Ia Colette, and we have a special guest today, so I'm very excited. We have Dr. Haru, and Dr. Haru is a playwright, a poet, a filmmaker, a spiritual, sexual teacher, healer, scholar, and social entrepreneur. Brother, you got a lot going on. I'm so pleased that you were able to join us today because I love it. I love it. I love it. You, when I looked at your information, it says that, I was trying to pull that up as I was talking to you, but it talked about your organization. Here's my computer moving slow. That you are the CEO and founder of the Center for Cultural Sexuality and Spirituality.
I'm the Chief Erotics Officer for the Center for Culture, Sexuality, and Spirituality. The center is a sexual cultural center, primarily for people of African descent, and it is a way for me to use my gifts as an initiate, as a practitioner, as a scholar, and activist and artist, to provide people of African descent with a space to develop their erotic empowerment, their sexual knowledge, to engage in the project of decolonization. So how do we get to own and reclaim our bodies and our desires, particularly for those of us whose ancestors were prisoners of war, kidnapped and brought to the Americas, or those of us whose ancestors were subject to imperialism on the continent. Both of those projects involved exploiting the resources, the energy of our bodies, involved distancing us from our bodies and the knowledge of our bodies. It involved getting us to feel shame and guilt and alienate us from our bodies and what our bodies provide us. And so the Center for Culture, Sexuality, and Spirituality is a vehicle for that decolonial and decolonization process.
Right on, right on. Now, you know what? You said a mouthful. That is something we never link in when we talk about spirituality. We talk a lot about just having freedom with yourself and your whole self, not we think it's just the mind, but just everything that it encompasses. Mm-hmm. What was your journey to that? How did you get to your name even, Haru? How did you get there? What was your journey? Where are you from?
Sure. So I am from the Republic of Brooklyn. That's where I was born and raised. And we got another person on the.
I'm about to play.
Hi. Hello. Good morning. I can't hear. I'm gonna go out and come back in. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Your brother.
I come from an activist family. Both parents were members of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense at one point. My maternal grandparents actually met in the American Labor Party. So I came from an activist family. I started my activism pretty young in response to the murders of Eleanor Bumpurs, Michael Stewart, then Michael Griffith, and I was actually in Bed-Stuy and saw a flyer for this program called the Junior Engineering Club. And I was, good in math and science at the time. So I took the flyer and went with my mom and a cousin to check it out. And I enrolled in the program, later finding out that this program that took kids between the ages of 9 and 15 and taught them the first year of electrical engineering school. So the physics, the calc, the electronics, all of those kinds of things, using African and Eastern mind science. So we were meditating, we were doing Tai Chi and yoga, we were tapping into the African unconscious, and using that as a way to teach these young kids these pretty technical concepts. And so I found out that the Junior Engineering Club, this program, was actually a project of this Kemetic priesthood, the Shrine of Amun-Ra, the Temple of the White and Gold Lotus. At some point, I received my calling to enter the priesthood, and through divination and astrological chart analysis, I was given the name Herukuti. Herukuti is Medu-Neter, what in the West we say ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, but in the indigenous language, the language is called Medu-Neter, or words of God. Herukuti literally means the face of God at sunrise and sunset. Herukuti is a Necher, or in the West, they may say a deity, a divine principle of God, oftentimes associated with being of justice, being aligned with Ma'at. So Herukuti has two objects in each hand. One is and the other is a sickle-like axe, and this is used to take out anybody who transgresses Ma'at, divine balance. And the sickle, Herukuti uses to cut one's own throat when one transgresses Ma'at or is out of balance. So that ability to humble oneself and to recognize the harm that one has done, or recognize when one is out of balance. So that's how I came to this work. Later on, I answered the call to Sekhmet and Heruhet, who are two other Necheru, or deities in the Kemetic pantheon, and or Paut Necheru, and I became keeper of the shrine of Sekhmet and Heruhet. And so that is what got me into this relationship, to pleasure, to love, the science of the erotics, what Audre Lorde would call the uses of the erotic as power. Yeah, that's how I got into this integration of sexuality and spirituality, which in ancient times, it actually was much more integrated than we think of today. We think of it today as being these two separate things. But in ancient times, there was a recognition of the connection between the spirit and the erotic.
All right. All right. Wow, that was a lot, but I'm learning a lot in that moment. That makes a lot of sense. Why do you think the two are so separate now?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of that has to do with, I'm giving feedback, I can hear myself talking. I don't know if anyone else is hearing that as well.
Okay. Can you still hear that? I muted some of us, so.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah, I'm hearing a little bit, but
we can hear you perfectly though.
I'll take off my my earpiece while I'm talking, so I won't hear myself. I think it stems from colonization, including the Christian missionary project, which divided the spirit from the body. I knew in my priesthood training that when we looked at these bodies of being, they were included the physical body or the khat, as well as these other psychic and spiritual bodies, and that they were put in relationship to each other. But Christianity had this notion of separating the spirit from the body. And then colonization, we had to be taught to separate our spirit from our body because of the physical violence of slavery, the physical violence of the exploitation of our labor, the physical violence of the rape that was perpetrated on many of our ancestors. Part of the way we could survive in that structure is to desensitize ourselves. We couldn't allow ourselves to feel fully what we were experiencing because of the magnitude of that violence and trauma. It also served the purpose of our enslavers, because when we are fully integrated, that's where our power comes. So it was a way to suppress resistance and rebellion as well.
Right on. Hold on, sorry. Yeah, I unmuted you. Sorry, we're trying to deal with the feedback that we were having. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think sometimes some of us don't always understand it in that way, because we're used to working in one particular way and not even seeing how it's all related. Right now, how in the Republic of Brooklyn, I love that. How do you see that? How do you see spirituality in its totality affecting our people exactly where you are right now?
Yeah. Historically, in Black communities, there are two things that we see most often: liquor stores and Christian churches. On every corner, every block, almost. Right? And that is, both do the same thing. They get us drunk on something that keeps us from taking hold of our personal situation and our collective situation. So a lot of our folks self-medicate through either alcohol or some other substance, or the pie in the sky that's given to us from the slave version of Christianity. Right? So when I'm talking about this kind of Christianity, I'm not talking about the Christianity that evolved in, for example, Ethiopia. When the person that we know as Jesus the Christ, or Yahshua, his family went to Egypt for protection. We're not talking about that kind of Christianity that's rooted in an African world. Talking about the Christianity that was taught to us taught to many of us in slavery and through slavery and in slavery. That Christianity very much is focused on pacifying us, keeping us drunk, keeping us believing in a conception of God that doesn't look like us. And so that's part of where I see the role of spirituality or religion in the Republic of Brooklyn. The other is, I would say, very, very powerful and vibrant African spiritual traditions and practitioners in Brooklyn. The Ifa and Lakumi communities, the Akan communities, the Kemetic communities, the various Condomble and Palo, the various spiritual, African spiritual communities that exist here in Brooklyn as well. So that there's a power here that is palpable. People have done ritual in various kinds of places. You may not even know that that's done, but you're walking in the community and you can feel it. There's the drummers circle that we have here in Prospect Park, which has a direct connection and link to the Congo Square in New Orleans. There, we go a little bit farther out, there's the African Burial Ground in Lower Manhattan. One of the things that Baba Chuck Davis used to do, who was the founder of, oh God, why am I forgetting it? Dance Africa, the annual Dance Africa celebration here in Brooklyn. Baba Chuck Davis would take folks to the African Burial Ground in Lower Manhattan and do a tribute to the ancestors and pour libations to them. Start the Memorial Day weekend of Dance Africa. There's also in Coney Island the tribute to the ancestors that was started by Sister Umalo, I believe, at Medgar Evers College, where folks would pay tribute to the ancestors of the Middle Passage annually here in Brooklyn at the Coney Island.
Right on. I've been to a few of those. I mean, I go to the African Burial Ground every year on the road trip. I did a road trip, the Quality of Life whole trip for Black girls and women. We go there. We go to Congo Square. I have been to what would be to Coney Island to do like a tribute to people who were lost in the Middle Passage. We do that here in California too. The Maafa, all the things you speak of. There is something though about New York in particular. There is a every time we go to the African Burial Ground in New York City, I've been there so many times because every year I take young people there. It is incredible. Can you tell me what you know about the history of that burial ground, if you can, and why it is important for us to pay homage there? Like everybody can't go all the way to Africa, or but I do think we have these sacred spaces throughout the U.S. that our ancestors have poured their life blood, into that space. Tell me a little bit about that African burial ground that's in Lower Manhattan.
Sure. And you also mentioned the Maafa as well, which was started by Reverend Johnny Youngblood's church, St. Paul's Community Baptist Church here in the Republic of Brooklyn as well. So there's that annual celebration as well, and that's what I mean by some of the reclaiming of Christianity as a liberatory force. That's a great example, and coming from an African worldview in Christianity. That's a great example. The Maafa commemoration that's annual at St. Paul's Community Baptist Church. But I'm not. Let me say it right now. And let you know I'm not a scholar of the African burial ground. So I'm speaking from my limited experience and perspective on it. The African burial ground was a place where Africans buried They're folks who had transitioned to the world of the ancestors. I believe as early as the 1700s. And because it was a place that was considered outside of the city limits, and so white supremacy and racism dictated that we had to be buried in someplace different than everybody else. And over the years, that those grounds were covered over and developed in various kinds of ways. So in the, what was this, 80s? May have been early 90s, but I think that, the federal government was doing construction on the site to build a federal building. And some of the remains of those African people were found. There was an attempt to keep it silent, but people who were working on the site let the community know. And journalists like our ancestor Gil Nobles, who had a show at the time like it is, were publicizing the existence of this recovery discovery. And so it led to a number of protests and activist actions to get the construction halted and to get the site acknowledged for what it was and its importance in African history, American history, New York history. And so there was work done archaeological work done to understand what was there. There was spiritual work that was also done. So there were a number of African spiritual practitioners as well as other religious leaders that were brought to reconsecrate and reinterm the remains of people who had been taken out or whose remains had been disturbed by the construction. My own personal experience of in burial ground was actually during one of those protests, and there's actually a image that was taken by the photographer Marilyn Nance of this. During one of the protests, there was a who I believe was from the House of Lord Church, which is another radical Christian African-centered church here in Brooklyn, New York, founded by Herbert Daughtry. There was a brother who was reading from Ezekiel and the Valley of the Dry Bones. And as he was reading, and this was, you have to think about the settings. You have to think about there were drummers playing, another drum. The brother came to the assembled crowd, and the weather started to change. We could feel the air shift and change, and the sky began to get cloudy all of a sudden. And as he read, the crowd started to vibrate with the energy that started to emit. And then it began to pour down rain as he read about the Valley of the Dry Bones. And people ran under cover. There was a building that had on the first floor basically open and was columns, so people started to run under the building for cover. And this was across the street from the excavated land of the construction. And the ancestors started to speak to me, and I went out to the fence as close as I could get to the construction. And a number of the other brothers who had come with me to the vigil came to surround. We got into a circle, and a number of us became mounted by spirit, became mounted by the ancestors. And we began to weep and cry as the rain poured down on our bodies. And it was at that moment that the sister Marilyn Nance took a photo of us in that moment. But that was a really, really powerful experience for me personally of being at the African burial ground. And every time I go, spirit and ancestors speak to me, and I can feel the remnants of that from that day.
Wow. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
What comes to mind as he's speaking? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah. As he's speaking, what came to my mind was a weeping and a wailing tonight. That was a powerful, powerful experience. And our drums, and the sound that comes from our mouths, from way down deep in our soul, brings those spirits, brings our egoon down and let them mount us, and so they can speak through us. And they're weeping and a wailing, that rain.
Wow.
Yeah, it gives you chills.
What do you think it means when you're starting to see so many of our ancestors' bones resurface? Like they talked about in DC, there's the discovery of a bunch of descendants of enslaved and some free people's bones have resurfaced in a couple of houses. So you're starting to see more of that. What do you think that means for us amongst the living? Those of us who know these sciences and this spiritual wisdom, what are we supposed to be doing?
Yeah. So we actually have some of those sites that have been here in New York as well. So there's the Wheatsville settlement of free African people that is actually, I'm on the cusp of Wheatsville. I live on the cusp of Wheatsville, actually, here in Crown Heights. There's also Central Park, the Seneca Village of free and formerly enslaved African people whose land was taken based on eminent domain to build Central Park. So we have a lot of those sites. I would say what comes to mind for me is the wisdom that Dr. Malidoma Somé provides. I trained under him in the spiritual medicine and technology of the Dagara people of Burkina Faso and Ghana. And among the Dagara people, there's a notion of the bones carrying wisdom. Right? Like when that old saying, I know it in my bones. Because in the bone is the bone marrow, and there's DNA in that marrow that is the encoding of wisdom and knowledge and experience passed from generation to generation to generation. And so what Spirit speaks to me and says with regard to the appearance of bones is that there's some knowing to be done. That we have within us a wisdom that is available to us if we would only tap into it. And that wisdom is important and necessary and relevant to the times in which we live. That wisdom in such crisis can be more grounding than watching CNN and MSNBC and Fox News.
Right on.
That there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. And that much of what we get on these Western media sources, CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, whatever, is information. Hopefully it's just information and not misinformation or disinformation, but it's just information. But there's very little wisdom that is being supplied. And so our ancestors are revealing their bones to us as a way to say that there's wisdom that is needed in this moment, if we would only tap into it.
Yes, because that wisdom is in our bones.
Yes.
That wisdom is in our DNA, our genetic memories, you know, and they are saying, wake up, you got it, you know. Powerful stuff.
Wow.
And the bones can be our Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
I get that. Wow. I totally got that. Okay, for real. Tell us about the work you do at the center. And does any of this connect to that?
Yeah, so I do relationship coaching and sex coaching. We create workshops and other kinds of learning resources for folks to develop their embodied knowledge, going back to this wisdom piece, how one can center oneself and ground oneself and be in conversation with that wisdom, listen, being able to perceive and receive the messages. So we offer various kinds of learning opportunities to do that, both for groups as well as for families, family structures, and individuals. And I identify as a neo-traditional African spiritualist in the sense that I am bringing my African-centered training and education as well as my Western training and education. And so I'm integrating those things in the work that I do. Like one of the gifts of African people here in the Americas is our ability to do that integration. That's what classical Black American music, otherwise known as jazz, that's what jazz has been. It's about integrating the African and the Western or European experience and making music, making art. So that's my practice. That's what I do in this work of educating, coaching, providing providing support for people who want to heal from the trauma of slavery, colonization, settler colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, capitalism, and this notion of cis heteropatriarchy, which is the framework for dealing with gender and sexuality and power in the West that we've adopted and internalized.
Wow, that's very powerful. How do you deal with that piece? Because sometimes in our community, we can see it so clear when white people do it, but we can't see it when we do it.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
It's helping people recognize how they've internalized it. So what I oftentimes say is like, you know, when you get a computer or you get a iPod or you get there is stuff that is already downloaded onto it. Right? There's software, an app, even your phone. There are apps that are already put on there. Right? And if it's attached to a Wi-Fi, there are ways in which those things get updated. So from outside, without there's software updates that get added on to your device.
Right now.
That's what colonialism has done to us. When we're born into the world, we're born with these apps that get placed in our consciousness without us even acknowledging or consenting to it happening.
Right on.
So we learn these things. Our notion of what it means to be, quote unquote, a man, or what it means to be, quote unquote, a woman. We've inherited these messages where some of us come.
Uh-oh, your sound.
We lost you. Okay.
Nope, his sound went completely out. Where'd your sound go? Uh-oh, did you mute yourself? He muted himself. There you go. Hold on. Okay, you back. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. You muted yourself. Good.
Some of us ancestral lines in which there were not even gender pronouns in the language. There's certain African language traditions where there are no gender pronouns. In Yoruba culture, in Ifa, there are Orisha that have multiple genders. But we're in this Western construct where, okay, there's only men and there's only women. There's only this and there's only that. So that those apps that have been downloaded and encoded in our system, I've worked with people to recognize that process has happened to them, and then invite them into a process in which they can intentionally decide, oh, you know what, that app don't work for me. That's not mine. That doesn't serve me. Creates a dysfunctionality in my relationship to myself and the African world and the African family. So these kinds of divisions that we have in our community around gender and sexuality, many of those have been downloaded into our systems, but they're not really a part of who and what we are and our way of being with each other. And so it's working with people to understand that, and then to heal and to grieve once they realize what has been done to them, how their relationship to each other has been undermined by this system. Part of the healing process is grieving. The violence that they've done to members of their family, the violence that has been done to members of their community, feeling alienated, isolated from somebody because some app that's been downloaded into their consciousness says that, oh, I can't love this member of my family, can't acknowledge their humanity, can't acknowledge their Africanness, their blackness, because somebody told me that, oh, they not black. If they doing that, that's not black. That's not African. Oh, you not acting like a real woman, a real man, like all of those kinds of things. Right? And then for folks who've been the targets of that violence, it's also working with them to heal and to grieve that pain and that trauma, right? And to embrace themselves in the ways that their ancestors would have them be embraced. You know, Sabofu Somé, also an elder and member of the Dagara community, wrote a book about welcoming spirit home, in which she articulates how among the Dagara people it is a community responsibility to welcome the returning ancestors home when they are gestating in their mother's belly, gestating in their mother's womb, I should say. We have lost in many ways that accountability, that community accountability and responsibility for welcoming the spirit home, welcoming the ancestor home. Right? Because if you believe that each of us are ancestors returning,
yes,
then how can you hate someone because you classify them as gay, or you classify them as woman, or you classify them as bisexual, or you classify them, or they classify themselves as transgender, or you classify them as heterosexual? Like, if you recognize them as ancestors or returning, and in the Dagara tradition, they're returning with gifts that only they can provide the community.
Right on.
You denigrate them. How can you push them out of the community? How can you attack them? How can you be violent to them? How can you not love them?
Right on. That makes sense. That's like everybody has the right to exist. What do you do though when some of that unwelcoming is because of all the violation that happens in our communities? Let alone getting to what your sexuality is, but because I work with a lot of girls, so much violation. And then it's like they can't even figure out who they really want to be, or everything with them is in such turmoil because we have no way of healing that as a community. You know, how, do you do any work around that in particular? And I know men must have the same story, honestly, to some degree, where they've been violated, but we turn that. One time I was at a meeting and the guy said his first sexual experience, I think he said he was like 10 or something, and, you know, working with an older woman. And I said, what? Like, when he I didn't think that's a good example, brothers. If you're 10 years old and you with some grown woman, that's not no sexual, like my first encounter. I mean, that's not cool. You know, I was trying not to like go there because I was kind of like, that's not impressive. That don't sound, baby, that's wrong. You know, do you do any healing around that in particular?
Yeah. There's been a lot of sexual violations and violence across all genders in the African community. You know, even Malidoma in Of Water and the Spirit talks about when he was kidnapped and brought to the missionary school, the kind of violence and violation that existed there, and that led to him running away, escaping, and going back home. There's a lot of trauma. in our communities across all genders, across all generations in our community. That's been sexual violence and violations. And yes, it is not something that can be avoided in doing this work. It is not something that can be avoided in doing this work, because sometimes that the trauma of that becomes a barrier in the present moment for the person to do the kind of work that they want to do, to show up in the world in the way that they want to show up as an empowered person, as an empowered being, making relationship choices that are not about following the script from the past, right? But that are really rooted in their intention, vision, and desires in the present. So yes, that work is needed. Sometimes it involves work with ritual, with and herbal magic, and medicine, mineral magic and medicine. Sometimes it involves things like journaling. Sometimes it involves embodied practices. So people are doing experiential exercises that get them to work through some of those violations. And it can be a combination of things. It's really about, as a conjurer, I really work on, okay, so what are the ingredients necessary for this particular situation to facilitate healing? That I
Uh-oh.
Your mic.
There we go. Your mic.
Can you hear me?
There you go. You good.
Okay.
That I identify as a healer, but I'm not the one doing the healing.
Right.
I'm facilitating a process that calls forth the divine power within the individuals so that they can heal the thing
in their own experience. So as a conjurer, I am putting together those ingredients that facilitate and foster that calling forth of the healing, the divine healing energy in the individual, in the group, or in the family.
Right on. Right on. Brother, you put a lot of great information today. Wow. Like I think this is such a conversation that we need to be having more of, in terms of looking at what that would look like for us to really love each other. And also, how do we welcome people back to our community that may have done some things that wasn't cool in community? That's something that I even struggle with for myself. And the fact that I be thinking about protecting the victim. And I it's kind of like, oh, because that's that, like that's something that we have to do more work on, or figure out how do we come together to even do that work. That's that healing of us as a collective, like the one mind, if you will. What do we do when part of it is not well? How do we heal that part? And I'm so grateful that you joined us today with this information, because I feel like sometimes with our people, you just have to start off in baby steps, but when it start going fast, it'd be rolling. Like it may feel really slow in the beginning. But I think once people begin to understand even those downloads, or how you came in with certain apps and you didn't even know you had the apps, you were just like, because that's what my grandmama did, and that's what my mama did. Like, well, that's what they had to work with, and that's what they gave you. But I always like that analogy about the roast and the cutting off the end, and then finally somebody said, well, isn't that part of the roast? It's like, I don't know, that's what your grandmama did, and then she did it because the pot was too small. You know what I mean? So we don't so I think about stuff like that, like how do we definitely welcome back in spirit, but I wonder how we welcome back people back after they've done the work to change whatever those apps were, or to get rid of those apps. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That community, what I call community accountability.
Mm.
The dagger also talks about the village community and conflict, and they say that oftentimes, if it's more than just two people in conflict, and even sometimes when it is two people in conflict, but it's a conflict that continues to persist even beyond attempts to try to resolve it, that is actually a signal that there's something that is happening in the entire community.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that we are all responsible and accountable to do the work to find out what is our contribution to this dynamic. Even though we may say it's one person or it's two people having this, like energetically we are connected.
Yes, real talk.
Similar to that Bantu concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we are all connected in this system, in this network. So if there's something going on in one aspect of the network, that has reverberations to all of us and are contributing to that one thing that may be look isolated, when in actuality it is not isolated.
Right on.
Mm-hmm.
Right on.
And in that way, that helps having that framework us to then not scapegoat an individual or put them as, okay, that's the pariah, they need to be pushed out, and once they're pushed out, then we're good. Well, actually, no. Actually, we ain't good until we are good.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's how do we hold people accountable? What are the standards that we require of each other? And how do you act in integrity when you do harm? How do you restore integrity?
Right on.
And then how do we accept and acknowledge when people have restored integrity?
Mm-hmm.
All right, now I was about to get the fan up in here because that's basically, I feel like, partly where we are. Like we really have to figure that out, because it gets bigger every day. And at some point, it's like, how do we restore that integrity, but also that we're connected? But we can't get away from each other. I just don't. We're just not going to be able to do it. Like it don't work like that. We're not going to be able to do that, Ms. Rob. But like, okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Brother, spiritual healer, wise being. I love the way you came in today and just really brought that information that we need to really be considering, particularly at this time. I feel like everything is slowing down for a reason. Even as it speed back up, it's still going to slow back down because things have changed. And maybe this is a way for us to do some of that community accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to say anything before we wrap up?
And this is also why we're seeing the bones, because we have this work to do, and our ancestors are, we are the ancestors, but they are prodding us, and they are up here. They are manifesting themselves through us so that this work can be done. Because we've been on the wrong path for a long time. And it's not going to be easy for us to get back to our center, So the work that you're doing, Heru, is powerful and so needed. The spiritual, for me, it's the spirituality of sexuality. Our sexuality is part of our spiritual being, not just our physical being or our mental being, but our spirit also.
Right on.
So this has been Just wonderful. Just be able to sit and to listen and to learn and to hear what your point of view and what you are doing, the work that you're doing. Yeah, you're a Melanoma Some and Sabon Fu Some person. You've done
Yeah,
work through them.
yeah. I've worked with Malidoma. I knew Sabonfu before she became and spoke with her. I didn't have an opportunity to work with her directly, but I've worked with some folks who knew her well and who worked with her. And again, I had the honor of speaking with her several times before her transition.
Yeah, she wrote the book on intimacy. That's one of my books that I keep by my bedside. I have a few, but that's one of them that I keep because I can always go to it and turn to any page and it works. It works for whatever's happening with me at that time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then working with Malidoma for a year, and it was actually part of my doctoral dissertation. Integrate the wisdom that I was learning with Malidoma with my work in theater, which comes out of Brazil, and African yoga as well. So integrating those three things to produce a process that I could use in working with people of African descent on healing, dreaming, visioning, and social. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I took notes.
Me too.
You see on the side, I'm writing on the side. I took notes. Thank you so much. Both of you all have on something similar here.
I
just noticed that when y'all were talking last. I said, "Oh, I like that. That's a nice piece."
Yeah, I'm noticing that.
The Calvary Show.
Yeah, it's like that's so beautiful. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for just having like a great conversation and discussion, and then just bringing us enlightenment. I'm just really big on. I think that no matter how much knowledge you absorb, there's always room for more. That's what I believe. Because some things you need to hear again, and some things you need to refresh yourself, and some things you didn't even pay attention to the first time because you were looking at something else. So I thank you so much, dear brother. And I hope to talk with you again soon. Yeah, always a pleasure.
Yes. Love you.
Love you too. Peace, family. We'll see y'all on Monday. All right, peace.
Yes.